In this final part of the course, I want to look at the phenomenon of the powwow, which is a fairly recent development in terms of ceremony and relates to the history of Indigenous people in North America and has been a very important part of the larger Indigenous resurgence in both Canada and the United States. I want to use this photograph to begin to talk about regalia and the importance of clothing in this context, and there is some debate about the provenance of this image, and so I'm just using it as a way to open up discussion. So this photograph is meant to illustrate the change in a child that has been assimilated into North American culture, and so we know historically under the Indian Act and the creation of residential schools that the children who were sent to residential schools, the first thing that happened was their hair was cut and they were forced to wear European style clothing. And so we've talked a lot in this course about clothing and the importance of clothing in terms of what it symbolizes and telegraphs and its meaning and so on. And in this particular case, the meaning is even more heightened. So reclaiming traditional modes of dress and wearing one's hair is an extremely important symbolic political act in the context of reclaiming of culture. So powwows across North America can be extremely large or quite intimate. It just depends on the setting. This is in an arena, but they do tend to share certain characteristics, and it's important to note that even the way the powwow is set up establishes an Indigenous ontology. So for instance, it's done in circle. So that idea of the circle and the way that that also de-emphasizes hierarchy. Another very common feature of all the powwows that I know of anyway is what's called the grand entry, where the group comes in, they're bearing flags of various nation states, but also various tribes in full regalia, and often at the very head of the procession are veterans. And so at pretty much any of the powwows I've gone to, this grand entry takes place. And so we've talked about the importance of procession already in this course, and this is another example of the importance of procession in public ritual. Another common feature of powwows is the drum circle, and generally it takes sort of center stage in a sense that they drum throughout the powwow. As far as I've ever seen, it's always men, and I was told that the drum is extremely important in terms of ways of seeing the world, and that it represents the heartbeat of Mother Earth. And so again, as I said, it's establishing that Indigenous worldview where the earth is so important. And many powwows take place outside if possible. It's not always possible, but where it's in a natural setting. The Nipissing Canada Welcome Powwow takes place every year, and it sometimes takes place in the gym, but increasingly it takes place near the pond at the back of the campus, and features the grand entry, features the drum circle, and so on. But the Nipissing Canada Welcome Powwow has a particular, I would say, aim, which is to welcome Indigenous students into both Canada and Nipissing and to make them feel at home. It also plays an important role in educating non-Indigenous students. So they also participate, faculty, administration from both the university and college participate. So the powwow in this particular case plays a very important role both for incoming Indigenous students, so we looked at frosh rituals and so on, so a similar role in terms of acclimatizing these incoming students, but also educating other students who don't come from an Indigenous background. Dance is at the very center of the powwow, and it's very interesting to me that within the Indigenous context that dance has a sacred function, and I think that can be strange for people from a Western background where dance is often, in Christianity and Islam, kind of has an ambiguous place within the tradition. So the idea of music and dance as sacred And so this dance emerged out of the plains, but increasingly takes place at all the powwows. And so we also see cross-cultural, cross-First Nation rituals. So they may have developed in one portion of North America, but now they've been taken up by other groups as well. The jingle dress emerged more from our area of Turtle Island, and from what I have been able to glean, it emerged out of a dream of a young woman who was told to sew this dress with these bells on it and to do dances of healing. And so I've been told that these young women dance. Often you can, if you follow the proper protocols, you can go and ask for them to dance for somebody who's sick in your family or for healing of some kind. So while there's some of the dances are competitive, a lot of them are very religious in their content. As I touched on earlier, regalia is a very important part of the powwow, and so often the costumes are sewn by the individual wearing them or by a family member. And they often have, as we saw with the jingle dress, spiritual significance. And I was told by a student that when the person is preparing that dress, they sew on a bell every day and they say prayers and so on. So the creating of the regalia is also often a spiritual act. I also have noticed, as in this photograph, not just with children, but in general, often the regalia is individualized. So it's traditional garb, but it also expresses the personality of the person wearing it. And so is an act of creativity, as clothing so often is. Traditional regalia also marks off different First Nations from each other. In this case, we see one of the traditional modes of dress of Métis people, and so many of you will recognize the sash. That's probably the most recognizable item of clothing for the people from the Métis nations. And so this becomes a very important marker of belonging within that community. As many of you will know, beading is another important part of regalia and another way to express creativity. And so we're seeing a real resurgence of these cultural practices along with language revival. So they're all going hand in hand. And often at powwows, various crafts are sold. So they also form part of an indigenous economy and a way of expressing culture. And so powwows, just to conclude, we can see they serve a variety of functions, both for First Nations, but also for settlers in terms of education, about culture, art, food, etc. And so I think this is why we're seeing so many powwows now in different cities and towns, because they really serve such a vital function and a variety of functions. So we looked at the example of university or college powwows that they serve a slightly different function, and so it's a flexible type of ritual and public ritual that serves a variety of purposes.